Hi, I'm John Cuddeback.
And I'm Sofia Cuddeback.
If you're wondering whether you can really be friends with your spouse
and raise children into responsible adults with whom you have a relationship,
and do what it takes to make a homestead, reconnecting with your body and the land wherever you live.
If you just want to think more about how to make a truly happy home in our trying times,
then The Intentional Household, a LifeCraft podcast, is for you. Join us. Welcome to this episode, A Better Way to Bury Our Dead. Might not seem like a very upbeat topic, but actually, I think it is a topic that's full of hope, a very exciting one, and one of great opportunity, because I think this is, in fact, a key part of renewing our homes today. Home isn't home. If home is the kind of the central place of life, then it's the central place of birth and death, and that are not just bookends, but are in an important sense the kind of beginning and end of life. And so, I mean, there's many conversations there that maybe that raises a conversation about home birth and even about home death. But that's not the conversation for right now. More, I think, kind of how we bury our dead. That we bury our dead in some important sense from our home or from our household, regardless of even if that doesn't mean in the backyard. But in some important sense, it's part of what we do in our home, and thus I think should be seen as how we're thinking about our family and our home life.
Yeah, even you saying that, as you're saying that, I'm thinking, well, it's kind of actually extraordinary because I think we kind of don't think about it at all in our contemporary context. I mean, at least that was kind of my experience until 14 years ago when my mom passed away, and then 11 years ago when your dad passed away. I mean, I guess prior to that, we had attended our grandparents' funeral, but we hadn't really attended a lot of funerals. And so it just really wasn't something we ever thought about at all. And I just think that's kind of unusual. I just think for centuries how dying was very prominent part of living. And of course, increased hygiene, longevity, decrease in infant mortality have all been this great kind of advance in a certain sense. But it's almost like it's removed from our consciousness, the reality that death is something that is part of all of our lives, and how we bury people should therefore be something that's part of how we live. And yet we just never really thought about it until we were burying a parent not that long ago. So it's kind of extraordinary that it's something that on the one hand is so natural and present, on the other hand is so far completely removed from our consideration until all of a sudden we find ourselves in a situation of burying a loved one.
And I think that's common now, even if there's obviously some. I mean, people have different experiences on this, where some have had to bury important people in their lives. Goodness knows, some people have, as children, buried their parents.
Sure.
But by and large, the trend is towards not so many burials, until maybe a little later in life, right?
Sure,
Fewer people dying when they're young. I mean, broadly, as it compared to a long time ago. But then, I mean, even there, it's not unusual to have the experience of a death of, say, a teenaged friend or something like that. But so it'll be very different for different people among us. But I think something we can all relate to is there's something that tends to be missing there. That by and large, the most common practices now of how we bury people are kind of, they've been eviscerated, kind of like our homes. Home life has been eviscerated. Our traditions and practices of burying have been, I mean, I think we might put it this way, have been broadly taken over by an industry. And, in saying that, I think it's important to say this isn't to take an unnecessary swipe at, those people in the burial industry.
Yeah. And we actually have good friends who are doing really beautiful, good apostolic work in the burial industry, really offering consolation and comfort and trying to help the families to bury their loved ones in a very humane, real way. And so there's a lot of good going on there too.
Absolutely.
But the reality is it is interesting that it's no longer something that's done by a family or a community. it's something that's done by an industry, and that's obviously going to have an impact. What impact do you think that
Yeah.
has on the way we go about burying our loved
That's.
ones?
I think we do need to think about that because, again, when we say that's not obviously the community is involved and the community can be involved. The whole point here, I think, of our conversations, we want to think about some principles and we want to move towards then some practical applications because we're going to share our own experience,
Yeah,
and our own experience has been even in the context of working with the laws, the practices, etc. As things
sure.
are now, you can do something that is profoundly nourishing for us and very fitting as a way of honoring those who have died.
Yeah, I guess you really need the principle in order to establish, well, what are the practices that surround it.
Right, right.
Yeah, especially given
Exactly.
now that we're kind of have been a little bit disassociated from customs or traditions, we need to kind of discover a principle that guides the practical element.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think again, the point here isn't to give a deep negative analysis of the industry as much as just to say this: what certainly can happen, and certainly to some extent is happening, is an industry, a business of burying people, is obviously going to have kind of its own standards, is going
Mm-hmm.
to have its own inclinations, the way it's going to tend to go, because these people are making a business and so that's going to tend to standardize things. It's going to tend, okay, well, they're going to tend to offer this
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to that, and that has broadly replaced those people that in the community would have had the practice, just the common practice, unless we've been passing on a custom of here's how we do this in our community.
Mm-hmm.
And when someone passes, that people would have had to step forward and do all those very practical things
Mm-hmm.
in a way that now we have passed that off to others. And I'm not saying that that's all bad, but again, we at least need to recognize this that has, in general, I think, made us think less in terms of we have these practices. This is what we're going to do. Here's how our community does this.
Mm-hmm.
We more have a sense of, oh gosh, where's the professional who's going to kind of handle this for us? Maybe while we grieve over here, we'll have the professionals take care of the details. And maybe part of it
Mm-hmm.
is what we've started to realize is that actually handling those details is part of our grieving.
Yeah, exactly. And that's totally what struck me as you said that, you know, our attitude seems to be more of let someone else take care of the practical details so that we can grieve. But actually, what we've lost is that those practical details are the way we grieve. That's an amazing point. Can you
Yeah.
just
Well,
flesh that out a little
when
bit?
hearing you say it back to me, I also just thought one of the neat things we talk about this a lot when we talk about marriage and life in the home, how by a natural plan that is we're only maybe more realizing now that we've lost the kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about this a lot. Work is a natural context to draw people together. And so you and I have often reflected those things that, say, spouses have to figure out together is one of the main things that brings them together. And so one of the big things we've noticed uh, in a death is the challenge of how you relate to the other loved ones, right? It can often be a very stressful time for the
Mm-hmm.
family. We have to, particularly say a parent passes away, a child passes away, a
Mm-hmm.
sibling passes away, that you're going to have to relate in a new way to the other members of the family. How are
Sure.
you going to work through that? I dare say, doing more of the work of burial is a very natural way to have to come together
Mm-hmm.
for starters, and not just, well, what directions are we going to give
Mm-hmm.
to the funeral home, but maybe that we be kind of caught up in the rituals
Mm-hmm.
that, because I mean we need to reflect upon that, how important rituals are for a number of reasons, to come together and to work on enacting those rituals is a way that actually brought a family together and helped them in all the different aspects of their processing what's happened.
So when you're saying enacting a ritual, it sounds like what you're saying is there's something in doing a particular kind of work as regards burying the dead that is in itself making something in us. So obviously, interfacing with the funeral home is a kind of work, right? So in a certain sense,
Sure.
whether you have, an industry-based funeral or a community-based funeral, the reality is they're both a lot of work, right? So, but you seem to be saying that they both of those works have a different result, and that it seems to be something to do with what activities are actually involved in burying the dead, that those
Yes.
particular ritual based activities, works, are doing something particular for us. Is that what you're
It
saying?
is. It is,
And
and that's a
maybe
good.
you
I'm
could use
glad
an
you're pushing me
example.
on
Maybe you
that.
could use an
Right. Well,
example
I
of
mean, so
what that
one thing
is.
I'm thinking about. We have my brother is married to a Sicilian. Part of I've it struck me a number of times when she would speak of the way that burials were done at home in Sicily, and indeed, this is how it was done. Still, there's very little of an industry of burying in Sicily, and correct me if I'm wrong, is not my recollection correct? I think with both of her parents, there's no embalming.
Mm-hmm.
That they immediately have to prepare a viewing in the home. And they need to think in terms of a whole set of things that go along with that.
Mm-hmm.
And again, ton of work preparing to receive people, preparing the body, dressing the body, cleaning the body first. Right?
Preparing a gravesite.
I mean, all these things have a certain ritual connected to them. And here, I mean, to go philosophical for a moment, um, I like to say, in view of the good philosophical understanding of human nature, we are naturally sign makers. Things that we do in our body, or with the body itself and with other material things, are very important ways that we signify basic principles, basic convictions of our life. Right? I mean,
Mm.
so I mean, see this, for instance, in manners, in posture, in how we dress, how we move through life, how we greet one another. There's a lot of signage that goes on that's exceedingly important in both expressing who we are and even kind of forming who we are. And I think particularly, I mean, what is ritual? Ritual is a kind of agreed upon common way of signifying, of using certain signs. A
Mm-hmm.
ritual, I'd say, is a community wide, passed on way of signifying things. That we what would be examples of that? I mean, how we interact with the casket, how we carry it, how we not what we do. I mean, even that we bury it in the ground, that we cover it carefully with soil, that we use flowers. There's signage
Mm-hmm.
to all these things, and so I think that with just a certain kind of humility, we need to recognize, hey, what actual bodily things we do at this moment is a very important part of, again, experiencing and living this.
And as you say that, I'm remembering other things that you have spoken about when you talk about man as sign maker, that it's not just that we have the capacity to make a sign, but that the sign, the meaning of the sign, the inner meaning of the sign actually has a capacity to form us.
Yes.
So it's not just that we show something about our relationship to the deceased, it's that doing the works forms in us something about the reality of our relationship to them, of our hope for their life beyond the grave,
Sure.
of our um, kind of affirmation of the life that they lived prior to their death, their life with us, their life with the community. And so it's really, man as sign maker is really a dramatic thing, because it's not just that we make signs, but that we can actually receive them and they form us. And so it sounds, let me
Yeah.
draw you out and
Yeah.
say, you say, there are all these signs, ritualistic signs in burial. What do you think we're most of all signing
Yeah. Well,
by
that
doing
okay.
that stuff?
Um, well, I mean, prior to trying to give an exact list, let's just note whatever it is. I'd say it's our most basic conviction about, I dare say, even about what it means to be human. because how we treat what is in some sense the end of life is key to expressing how we see the point of life itself. And you could even say that, I think, before you even transition to saying, and of course, the next life. But key, that is very much there too. I mean, it's interesting. We could look at anthropological studies in general. Most cultures have looked towards a next life, but I think we would even find those that aren't looking towards a next life would still have a ritualistic sense, or expressed through ritual, their sense of kind of the importance of what has passed in this amazing human life. You express the human difference, right? I mean, you don't bury anything else in the way that we bury human persons. Right? So already we're giving it's a way of expressing our self-understanding, how we are different, how this death is much more serious, much more implication rich, something much more noble, and something much more noble has come to an end. But isn't it interesting how all at one time, I'd say, particularly if you looked at this from a Christian perspective, it's an astounding combination of expressing sorrow at an ending and hope towards a beginning. Both of those things are profoundly signed in how we bury. That something wonderfully rich has come to an end, about which we are very sorrowful. And at the very same moment, we are acting with great hope that something even better is coming. I mean, again, what is more central to our identity, to how we're living life even right now? I mean, because haven't humans always recognized, and then even more so in a Christian context, how being aware of death helps you focus on your life.
Sure, yeah.
So how we bury it's like this little gift in God's great providence. How we bury other people is the gift of a reminder to us, obviously, of our own death. And so life is punctuated for us with these opportunities to reflect on death, to honor death, in many ways to enter into it, and take that as a really irreplaceable opportunity for insight into what our life is.
Yeah, wow, I think that's a great point. And I'm hearing kind of embedded in this kind of description of what the convictions that burying someone expresses that we hold, kind of folded into that also seems to be a conviction that somehow we're all involved, right? That
Yes,
it's not just that
yeah.
this person has died, but somehow we see in that person, our person. We recognize that their lives have been intertwined with our lives. So their death means something for our life. And so I wonder, kind of thinking about that, it almost seems like this might be part of the reason why the importance of the sign making is something that we have to actually be involved in making the sign. It's not just that a sign is made, but that maybe that's part of the reason why our more intimate involvement in the preparation of the body, in the viewing of the body, in the way we invite others to come and mourn and bury our beloved with us, that it actually, that's what we need as being involved in the passing of this person. We need to actually be bodily involved in the signage because we are involved in their death, just like we were involved in their life. And I wonder if that's part of the thing that helps us to be able to grieve more effectively when we are allowed to make a sign with our body that involves us in their end, because we've been involved throughout our lifetime in a myriad of small signs and actions and all that, so that all of a sudden at the end, when the person is taken away from us in this ultimate way, physical way, that we feel that there's a bridge was broken down and we weren't allowed to cross that bridge with them if maybe our bodies are not involved in somehow that
Yeah.
transition.
Yeah, I love that. And it makes me almost want to say we have to be careful how we use words. But almost in some sense, we're being buried with them.
Yeah,
I mean, I think there's a fitting way of saying something is buried of us when we bury a loved one.
of course.
And you just stop and think about that. I mean, something of me is buried here too. Not in a morose way, not in a I can't go on. No, indeed. Somehow in the burial is we are with you. We don't intend ever, as it were, to live without you.
Mm-hmm.
We will bear you in memory always. In a sense, thus we continue to live together. And all of that is being said, is being enacted, is being actualized by the richness of the burial. I mean, just imagine how. I mean, going back to the ancients, it was a huge thing. And if you look in Scripture, um, remember it was wasn't it Tobit who was he would go around and he would find the deceased and
Those
he
who have
would
been
bury
martyred,
them
yeah,
even at risk of his life.
right.
There's
And this
always
was
been
accounted to
this
him as a great charity.
this profound sense of someone has buried this, and there's so much that might be said there of why that's so. But let's just kind of come back, and I want to move towards sharing our experiences here. But I just
Can I
think,
just
yeah, no,
actually,
please,
before
yeah,
we leave that topic,
yeah,
I just want to say, yes, it's a witness that we always live with them, our intention is to not live without them. But the reality is that there is a separation. And I think if that separation is not acknowledged, you can't fully psychologically and emotionally heal. And that's why the burying process allows for there to also be an end, even though in some ways that person lives with us. If
yes,
if we
good,
if we if we
okay,
refuse to kind of acknowledge that there is an ending, this is not going to be psychologically and emotionally, there's no closure for you. And I think also it's very important because it witnesses to the fact that there will be an end for me, but it's not right now. And there are those that I still live with in a bodily way. And so it in a certain sense, we're not jumping into the grave with the person who's deceased.
right,
By
absolutely,
burying them, it actually
yeah,
helps us to turn to those who are given to us to still live with bodily. And it kind of reaffirms and gives us conviction that these are those who are given for me to live with bodily. And so therefore I do that with fullness and vigor, knowing that someday I will die and those people will bury me. And it's this kind of affirmation both ways. So
yes,
it's an
yeah,
affirmation
yeah,
putting the
yeah,
person into the grave, but also it helps you to be able to continue to live with those who are bodily given to you. So I think
amen,
it's
yeah.
very important. On the one hand, it allows us to them the deceased to continue to live with us, but on the other hand, it also allows us to recognize the reality that there is a separation.
I think that's an absolutely great point. Something that's really struck me in you're saying that think what it does for us. Just know by our participating in a burial this way that particularly when we know there's this ritual, this is tradition, this is just how it's going to be done. It's a very important part of our own life that we kind of know that will be done for us.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, of course, obviously something could happen in a time of, catastrophe or whatever, where we're not, buried the way we would have wanted to be buried. And this is not,
Mm-hmm.
the greatest of problems, but nonetheless, it is very meaningful to go about your life, kind of fortified by knowing this is how we bury one another. What an incredibly strong sense of how we build community, how we express we are part of one another. We will always be
Mm-hmm.
a part of one another. So I think, but it's. I think we need to linger for a moment and recognize these things are not being done.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to take being intentional. There's a number. We mentioned how there's the challenge of when it becomes kind of standardized through an industry that is not necessarily connected with this particular community and the faith traditions of this community and the other traditions of this community,
Mm-hmm.
we end up by and large losing at least a number of the very rich parts, aspects
Mm-hmm.
of how you would bury someone. I mean, I might say, especially from home. Right?
Mm-hmm.
We've seen before in many ways, industrialization has removed so many practices from households that used to pertain to households. By
Mm-hmm.
and large, it was the household. Any household would have the kind of burden, obligation, duty, and honor to bury its dead. And the other households would come together and support it because maybe there was a kind of recognition that it will be hard for this family, this household alone to do this burying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so the others would come together and empower that household to do this
Mm-hmm.
thing.
On many levels. Yeah.
And again, that it is we, the household, as it were, from our home, from the home that this person lives in now, we, his, her people, in this very palpable, physical, present way, are kind of saying to the world, come join us in burying our deceased.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that I think very, very much has been lost. A couple other things, we live in such a strange age that tends to be afraid of death
Mm-hmm.
and want to kind of sweep it under the carpet. This leads to a number of the practices that have become common. I mean, do I need to say more than the word astroturf?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the fact that at so many burials still you have this fake plastic green stuff put out over the earth. Now, one might say, is there a practical reason for mud or something? I mean, if so, fine. But I think it's kind of fair to say the way that it tends to be so universally used is the thought that seeing dirt, seeing earth is unpleasant. We're going to kind of
And of
keep
course,
things clean and sanitized.
that's connected to often um, out of burial, you don't even see the casket lowered into the ground. So your
That is
parting
another
site
part of
is
it.
the casket hovering over astroturf. And so that does seem to point toward kind of a general aversion to the notion of being interred, put in the
Yes,
dirt.
and I'm not saying that this isn't a conspiracy, as though people set out to deprive us of this, but the reality is, many of us are being deprived. I mean, I remember very clearly, in burying my grandparents, leaving, as you said, with a casket hovering over the ground, and and then just miscellaneous cemetery worker, cranking, my beloved into the earth. Um, so this is a loss. This is a loss on all sides. It's most of all, it's a loss for us who are doing the burying. Right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not that need not be a catastrophe, as it were, for the one being buried, but doing burial right it's about everybody. It's about giving proper honor to the one we're burying. It's about doing an appropriate grieving ourselves. It's about saying something to all around us. So it's for the deceased, it's for us as individuals, it's for us
As a
as a community.
community,
There's
sure.
so much that it can be a positive, though a painful one, but isn't this a central lesson of life? So we need to now be willing to do something a little different. We're going to have to be intentional. We're going to have to try to recover certain practices. And it's not as though we have to do an end run necessarily around the industry, but we're going to have to maybe stretch the industry. We can start to change the industry, and we're going to have to dig deep and realize, hey, we can express in how we bury our loved ones. We can express different convictions. We're not afraid of earth. We're not trying to hide anything. We're not trying to minimize the pain by having it seem as though we're not, burying someone into the earth. No, we're
Mm-hmm.
gonna do this full on. We are gonna mourn together. We're not gonna avoid the things that might tend to make us cry. We're gonna lean into them because that's part of our shared experience here.
Yeah. And I just want to add that actually there's lots of room within the industry to do the kind of things that you're talking about. Our experience has been that we've never had to do anything outside the industry. We've just had to know that we can ask the industry or tell them that this is how we want to do it. And so
Right.
actually it's kind of surprising to discover there's so much that can be done, frankly, with the aid of the industry. The
True.
industry does help
Yeah,
us.
you're absolutely
It's just,
right.
I think the problem is most of us, because we're so far removed from the tradition, one, we don't know that this is something that is good for us. And also we don't know what to ask for. So
Yes.
this
Right.
conversation
No,
is, as
exactly.
we kind of dive into the practical aspects, this conversation is really about understanding, well, what kind of things can we ask for? What and then there's a question of the practical, what things are possible, which of course is going to vary for different people in different circumstances. But
Sure.
if we understand some of the principles behind it, then even if, let's say, everything obtains with an industry burial, it can nevertheless be radically different when those who go into it with an awareness and understanding. So your personal presence, you're not attending the funeral, you're actually burying your beloved,
Amen.
even if
All
you
right.
have to avail yourself of all the industry aid. So
Well,
anyway, let's go into
all
the
right. All right.
practical
So,
questions.
in that context, we could be sharing things that we've seen and done with
Yeah,
our
sure.
own hands, and eyes and hands. That first of all, I'd say we need to learn the options and have an attitude, not the attitude of, oh gosh, I hope I'm allowed to do that. Have a little bit more of a type A approach here. We're burying our dead. And if we're going to a funeral home, we are coming to you to ask your assistance in doing this. And I think that any decent one, again, we know some fine ones, will they'll immediately
Support, yeah,
recognize, okay,
sure.
this is going to be one of those kind, because they certainly know how to take over and do everything. And I dare say they might even incline towards thinking that's what most people want them to do. So right from the start, we're going to kind of signal, hey, this is something we want to be really, really involved with. And that's what we did. I'm going to share a bit about burying my father. One of the first things we did is we went and said, hey, we were blessed to have a family cemetery. And so that did allow us to pursue some more options that some others might not be able to. Although again, the key here is we're not going to be able to tell you all the details of what's going to be possible in your cemetery situation. But for ours, we were very blessed to be able, because we live in the countryside, and actually here it's rather straightforward to get um, a, uh, uh, a personal family cemetery. The parish didn't have a cemetery, so for us that became all the more important. And so we went to the funeral home and just said, okay, we're going to want to do as much of this as possible ourselves. Are you willing to support us in that? Yes, they were. So we dug the hole ourselves. Now it turned out that digging it by hand was too difficult. Here, there's an awful lot of shale on our earth. So we got a friend of ours who was actually a friend of Dad's, who came in with his backhoe, and we gathered and with him kind of watched him, participated. You know, when a backhoe works, you often need a little bit of shovel work right there with it. We were able to get in there and be involved in the digging of a hole. When that earth is first broken, each step is a kind of a new way of entering into and having to deal with what's going on here. So we dug the hole.
And that was a big moment for both you and Dad's dear friend who came with his backhoe, of crying and mourning and
It was.
grieving and
It
being together
was.
in the memory of. So
It,
that was
it was.
a profound
So
opportunity.
I'm not sure how to tell this story. How we should. I mean, maybe we should just make a little list here first of, again, based upon the principle of check out your options. Have an attitude of, if at all possible, this is what we want to do. We want to do as much that's going to involve us, involve the broader family, as fitting, involve the broader community. We want to be involved with our bodies. We want to be in touch with the earth, flowers, natural materials. We want to, in anything we can do to be engaged in real physical ways that are naturally a part of our mourning process. That's what we want to do.
And allowing the community to be able to be as close to that process as possible, and as the situation allows.
Exactly.
And that would be certainly one of the ways for us that we experienced that was waking your father, right? So
And indeed,
we were blessed to be able to wake John's dad here at his home, and received many of his
in the
friends
barn, yeah.
in his barn, that where he had hosted so many community events and welcomed so many people generously into his home. It was really a beautiful opportunity that allowed many, many, many people who loved him and that he had had an effect on their life to be able to come and see him there in his home, in this place where he had received them. And it was a very beautiful, intimate, and welcoming experience for many, many, many of those who were able to come, not just the family, but the community. It really brought everyone quite close.
Indeed. Let's pivot to an interesting parallel thing. When we buried your father, he had, let's make a note here about cremation. Your father had, when your mother passed, had mama cremated. And that was for many practical reasons, financial reasons, transportation, having died remotely from where she was to be buried. That, and cremation, now the church accepts this as acceptable. And understandably, earlier on, there was a sense of there is something very important about burying the body. And I think now the sense is we have to, in any case, keep that spirit. If we do cremate a body, we need to still treat the ashes as burying the body.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't think we have to. These are legitimate options, right? I think it's fair to say, I would suggest that when practicable, burying the body is preferable. Is just allows for more of the sense of the ritual. I mean, think of the carrying of the casket and so forth. However, we can attest from our own experience. Well, that was what we did with my father. It's not what we did with either your mother or your father. Your father had requested that he be cremated and arranged so, but we, had a beautiful mini casket and went through this same kind of home, doing it ourselves as a community burial process for his remains in the form of having been cremated. Mm-hmm. So one way or the other, there's something primordial about burial in the earth. Mm. But I go back to just start to say, when your dad passed, because we were going to cremate him, we immediately took that opportunity, before even having his body taken by the funeral home. We took time as a family to have, because you have that short window, and we first spent time as a family, right? Remind me of how that timeline.
Yeah, so we spent time as a family immediately after my father died, welcoming the family in. And then that evening, we were able to invite the community to come and pay their respects and wake him in his own home where he died. It was an incredible blessing. His home was very, very small, and there were many people. And so it was kind of a continual flowing stream of a lot of joy, support, grief, sorrow, closure. Yep. So it was a really beautiful opportunity to spend that time quietly. My father passed away in his home. We were with him, and then we stayed with him all throughout the day, and were able to welcome his friends and relatives to come and bid their respects and farewell at the end of the day. So it was that time for the family to be with my father's body after he passed away was incredibly important time for each of us, all in our own unique way. And then at the end of that, to seamlessly be able to welcome his friends and relatives before we sent him on. That was just a really special and important time.
So just to be clear then on and again, partially here, we're just throwing out a few anecdotal things that just give examples of, everyone's situation is going to be different, but of ways you can think about your situation. It's obviously ideal that someone die at home. Mm-hmm. That's not always going to be possible.
Yeah, my mother did not. Your
and
father
and
did not.
and if someone doesn't die in the home, then we're going to pivot, and we're going to obviously do whatever's fitting. But I'd like to just kind of reiterate: home is a place to be born. Home is a place to die. Doesn't mean that we can always actually be born in that place and die in that physical place. But in a sense, you're still always being born into this home. In a sense, you're dying from this home.
Mm-hmm.
And again, according to circumstances, it's wonderful when it can be in the physical place. If it's not, then but place is always important. And we're going to look at what can we do now. Okay, now if we're going on to the burial, where are we going to have a wake? How are we going to do the burial? What's the place? Place is important. In this case of the blessing with your father, again, which was so different from mine, but we were able to apply some of the same principles. That, okay, knew he was going to be cremated, the blessing of his dying in the home. Boom. We had that stretch of time there where people would just come. I mean, what people do. And some people come. Sometimes a child who wants to come and kind of get right there in the bed next to Dito, next to
Mm-hmm.
Grandpa.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to reckon with this. This is not morose. There's something deep seated. Children, particularly, I think we should be thinking about how we're going to help our children. This is a very important part of this whole situation. They probably don't have examples. They're not listening to this podcast. They're not having this discussion.
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to draw them in and help them recognize feelings that they're having about kind of wanting to be there with and be physically involved? They might not recognize their own desire there. We might have to kind of take them by the hand. That's going to take discernment, but kind of bring them along to do something that first they might seem very shy to do. Maybe some will want to do it, and then we want to empower that. Others, again, it's gentle. Different people will do it in different ways, but to have the opportunity, at least where they could go in right there and give a hug and give a kiss and touch,
Yeah, and
that's what
actually,
we were able to do there.
children are a really great example of why the sign is important, because very often they can't pinpoint or express their emotion. And so to have a physical expression of allows a child in an environment like that to grieve and to have closure, where adults can discuss it, they can talk about it, they can try to figure out what do I need to do and then pursue that. Children often don't have that freedom or opportunity.
Yes.
So to create an environment around death that through signs gives them the opportunity for closure, for grief, and for closure that otherwise maybe rationally they can't pursue on their own is actually a very important way of taking care of your children.
And I think patterning for them the physical involvement and signage. I just think, without naming names, I think of one of our children and one of your brothers, and how he does certain physical signs anytime he even comes to to the family cemetery, kissing the stone. That children, it gives them permission. When they see an adult do certain physical things, it gives them a sense of, oh, it's okay to do that. It makes sense to do that. It can be very formative. So in case, back to your to the situation with your father, and then the next day the body went off to be cremated, and then we moved to part B of the as natural and kind of family community based burial as possible. Going back to my dad's, because that was kind of our first really profound experience of this. I'd just say a huge part, so memorable. Thank God that we took the approach of anything we can do with our hands, we want to do. So I want to give a very simple example that too often I think is missed. This is, no one should look back, of course, and feel guilty about anything. This is all just, if this fits moving forward, maybe this is something we can do. Carry that casket. If there's not enough strong people around to carry a casket, okay, then you don't. Then you use that kind of roller thing that the funeral home has. But I'm talking about even at church, that, when in doubt, I always just think I love seeing the sons, the brothers, the carrying that casket. When you pick it up, there's something so primordial of okay, ready,
I'm
on
doing this
three,
last thing.
heave,
Yeah.
and you feel the weight
Mm-hmm.
of your loved one's body. This is profound. And I was even just thinking, or even God's great providence, it's a child. You feel the lack of weight
Mm-hmm.
kind of lifts, and it's so light.
Mm-hmm.
But that's part of it too. Okay, and
Mm-hmm.
so we don't need several of us to carry, but nonetheless, we're all going to gather and we're going to carry this child. Or is it the elderly who kind of wasted away at the end, and it's surprisingly light?
Mm-hmm.
But all that, I mean, we remember this. A younger child being involved, even, and invited in, perhaps not too young, but I mean, to be involved in this. So in church, when possible, have those handles on there. Make sure you've got good handles. Make sure you have enough handles on the casket. These are practical things we might not have thought of. And then when you get there, we don't. There's a place that we need the funeral home staff for, but if we're able to do it ourselves, gather out. Even if we have to take turns. I remember after carrying my father's for a while, I was at the end of my strength.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think I was gonna say, "Well, get that roller over here"? No, I wasn't. Unless I was literally gonna collapse. Or in any case, rather than that, I would have rotated in a friend. Here, I can't carry this any further. Here, Dad's friend, come. Hold this.
Mm-hmm.
So it's such a simple thing, but so memorable. I mean, it's almost like I can feel like I have muscle memory right now of carrying my father's casket.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention then coming and that hole that we mentioned. We thank God we had the inspiration to do this. We it took a little bit of physical, figuring out using ropes. We wanted to lower the casket in ourselves,
It
and
was
so
very difficult.
it was very difficult. But I mean, as though the men aren't going to gather around and figure that one out. and
Mm-hmm.
and and we have beautiful pictures, and I have beautiful images of my nephew, and my brother, and of different people there, and of mom just standing there, and us heaving, and letting that, slowly letting it down. And then of course there's the moment of mom being given the shovel, and kaboom, that first thud of soil. You'll never forget that sound, but it's part of it. And so this happens in different ways. But then, going through, we talk about ritual, going through the order of the family in putting in the shovelfuls or the handfuls. And then turning to all those family, the other relatives and the friends, and saying, anyone who wants to help bury Dad now, come on up. Come on up. The conversations we've had with other members of our community of how memorable that day was, it's just such an astounding gift. Anything you would share there from any of the other family burials that we've done?
It totally depends on the character of the family, like what is special to the family, what do they do. In our family, we sing, so that was a large part of our being able to sing while family and community and friends
Oh,
all buried my dad. And my mom, it was the same way. So singing is a really beautiful way to be able to mourn the dead and be
yeah,
with them.
it sure is. The Byzantine Ukrainian hymn of eternal rest grant unto them is haunting in the extreme.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like it was an inspired melody of and of course, your family sang that for Dad too,
Mm-hmm.
and was utterly unforgettable. Um, I mean, these things can be done, but well, it just makes me think that ritual, the singing, what we're wearing. Earlier, I was thinking, what other examples of ritual? The color that we wear, the black, that we speak, that you don't speak loudly, that you speak in hushed tones. Not only the color that we're, that you're dressed with a certain formality, the way we speak and the words that we say. It might sound stiff, I offer my condolences, but no, it's fitting, and to go and to and to give and receive words of condolence. It's so easy to turn away and not do these things because it's going to be hard to do it. But what incredible to be something worth noting when you're the family of the deceased, thinking of a burial we were at recently or a funeral they were at recently, and it was a very difficult circumstances of the death, and the family was so noble, it was so beautiful. It was so hard for them to stand there and to receive again and again the words of the people coming, but they realized them standing and receiving those things was a gift and was due to the others who are coming. And so there's a communal mourning. Our loved one has other people that wants to come and be a part of this, and we must not act as though we are alone in this burying. We are alone in our sorrow, those who are closest. How many times have I been to a funeral of another where I know I'm not in the inner circle, but I want to be there. And it's great when you feel that you're able to be a part of it. So anything we can do reasonably to involve others and not have it seem as though we are privatizing our sorrow,
Mm-hmm.
and we're working together
Mm-hmm.
to do these things.
So, on a very practical level, I mean, we've talked about some things that you can do that are kind of outside of the box, or in any case, outside of the box nowadays, and to really encourage people. Or, I mean, when a loved one dies, and all of a sudden you have to think about burying them after they died, it's kind of like, wow, bad timing. Can I think about this later? I've got a lot on my mind right now, and so you don't even know what kind of things you could do. So, hopefully, just these examples just give open a possibility of
Yes.
one or two things or a small thing or something like, but that's different from some of the examples that we
Yeah.
gave. The main thing that I want to underscore is that even if you can't do any of those things, so first I want to acknowledge what we do with our bodies matters. It does matter. So it's not like, well, it doesn't matter. I just did it this way. Certain things are going to be more meaning dense with our
Yeah.
body. We live in difficult circumstances, and certainly the circumstances of death and burial are particularly difficult in many, many different ways for different people individually. So if you cannot do the physical things, the thing to remember is that all of those physical actions that we might want to do around the burial of a loved one, or might try to do, or we think of as an ideal, all of those things are springing from an interior disposition that I am choosing to enter into this experience and be present.
Mm-hmm.
And so even if you have to completely do everything standard funeral home burial style, the radical difference between you being present through your intention and saying, I am burying my loved one here, even if funeral home pallbearers are bringing the casket down the aisle on a Guernsey,
Mm-hmm.
or there's astroturf and all of these kind of things. Of course, you can always ask for the casket to be lowered while you are present. And that
Yeah.
alone, even if you can't do any of the lowering, that
Yes. Good point.
alone
Yeah.
is a very sacramental experience.
Amen.
And it's very
Amen.
important. And so, part of it is, I would say the distinction being, sometimes at a funeral, you feel like the funeral home is burying the dead and the family is attending the funeral. So you don't want to ever just attend the funeral. You actually want to bury your loved one.
Hmm.
And even if you're deprived of being able to do it physically, like some of the examples that we said, the most important thing is that you be there through your intention. And of course, that's an added challenge if you can't do something physically. That means you
Right.
have to be by your will, constantly staying open and present, which is very difficult in the face of sorrow. it's very difficult through intention to say, I will choose to go into this suffering. Having something to do with your hands brings you into the suffering.
It does.
So it doesn't tax the will to always be choosing to stand in that suffering. But in the absence of being able to do those things with our hands, we can be present with our heart and our intention and bury our loved one.
Amen. Amen. And I just wanted to say, even if you just put your hand on the casket.
Yeah.
I mean, just simple things like that. We can tend to be a little embarrassed about that. We can do those things, and that is. But I love your point. It is most of all what's in the heart, and to the extent that we can, we're gonna enact that, embody that in what we do. Well, how about we just kind of conclude then with a resolution and encouragement to one another. This is such an important area. It's a way we can help one another. We can reach out. We can gently, without forcing people, making them feel guilty. And hey, you can do that. Have you thought about maybe doing such and such from your home? If not, or have you taking such and such care of such and such yourself? Can I help you with that? Can I come in? Can the rest of us come and be able to assist you in this way? Just that both in bearing our own immediate loved ones and the others in our community, because it's the community. It doesn't have to be a huge community. It's our small community that's in which this person has lived, in a sense, continues to live, and we signify that, and we signify the beautiful faith we have by God's great generosity of an unending life that makes all the difference now and gives reason, unending life to which we are called. Gives reason to bury those who die in a particular rich kind of way.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Before we wrap up, I just want to think we should touch on one more practical thing. Oh. And sorry, that was so beautiful.
That's
sorry
all right.
to descend into the practical, but it occurred to me that we said something about having a family cemetery. And I just wanted to just briefly touch on that. We've just had a lot of consideration about whether to have your own family cemetery or bury it in a communal cemetery. And we have been blessed to have the situation where we are able to have a family cemetery, and it's gotten a little bit bigger. Our experience is that a communal cemetery has a really beautiful and great meaning to it,
yes,
that especially offers a kind of permanence to the memory of the deceased that in our fluid lifestyle that people live nowadays can't be guaranteed in a family cemetery. So it's something to be very much considered.
That's a great point.
That we had the experience of buying a home where there was a single grave site there. And when we moved in, we had no idea who it was. We didn't know who the people were. And it just got weedy and overgrown, and no one ever came to visit the grave. And my mother, as an act of charity, just started weeding around it. But it made us realize that the great merit of a communal cemetery, long after you and your family are no longer able to come there, people are visiting community cemeteries, and the memory, and just reading the name on the headstone, it keeps the person in memory and the care. And so just to offer kind of take serious consideration, while on the one hand, it seems very intimate and wonderful and personal to have your own family cemetery, there is a larger consideration that maybe is worthwhile considering.
And honestly, I think I'd just straight up say, in the abstract, to the universal level, it's second best. The great tradition of
best?
Having a home cemetery.
Yes, exactly.
Because a parish cemetery, that community aspect is very fitting.
Yes.
Yeah. And so it was a particular situation that we're in here, and we're certainly not suggesting that as a one size fits all.
Yeah.
Whatever cemetery, and I mean, how beautiful it would be, again, to be right next to the others from your community that you buried there in that cemetery, and to pass on the practices of how you do that. Thanks for pointing that out, dear.
So just to end on that very practical note.
No, good. Well, and may we all continue to pray and discern how best to honor our beloved dead.
Amen.
Thanks for being with us. Thanks for tuning in this episode of The Intentional Household. If you've enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and leave a rating or review. If you have any topic requests, please send them to lifecraftgroup@gmail.com. For our Wednesday reflections, free courses, reading groups, and live events, please visit life-craft.org.